Good morning. Gertrude Stein said it was always more important to have a good view behind you. So, because she understood that advertising, it was how you were seen as opposed to what you were seeing. And so that's clearly the case. But I noticed that I have a boxing match behind me, so that makes me a little concerned what the metaphor is in terms of where we are today. The snake on one hand and the couple on the other. Read it as you will. Anyway, welcome, good morning. I'm Adam Weinberg, the Alice Pratt Brown Director of the Whitney Museum. I want to welcome you all to this glorious installation of the Whitney's collection that covers the period from 1900 to 1965. And I was here as it was being installed, but now to see it all lit and fresh, it truly just brings great joy to me and actually great pleasure and great sentiment, because as somebody said to me as I was just walking through the galleries, it feels like you're back at the Whitney again in a way. And it's true, because these are works that we all know in many ways so well and others that we don't know so well. But I have to say, one of the great advantages of this new building of the Whitney Museum is the amount of space we're able to devote to the collection. You know, in the recent years, we've had the privilege of, delving very deeply into the collection and looking at new ways to tell the story of American art from the beginning of the century until the present. And this story is not just one story, but it's many stories, and it's many stories that evolve and that grow over time. And frankly, it's, I think, a story that the Whitney, both through its collection and who it is historically and the staff that it has, that we're uniquely qualified to tell. Now, while the museum is most often focused on the now of contemporary art, and I think you see that on the 2 floors of the biennial, the Whitney has always been the museum of its time and of its generation, it's really important for the Whitney Museum to look back. It's important for us to put the present into context with the past and to have a sense of the history against which the next generation of artists see themselves in relationship to. We also see that on the Spilling Over floor, the Spilling Over exhibition, which is on the 8th floor. I hope for those of you who haven't seen it that you take a chance and go up to the 8th floor and see it with all the beautiful light today. It's really gorgeous. But I think right now you see well over, with this installation up, you see 100 years of 100 plus years of American art on view, which is really great. Now, I think for many of you, you probably know that the Whitney had its origins in the studio of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Mrs. Whitney was a maker, even more so than a collector, and even though we have a lot of works that she collected here, she prided herself most on being an artist. And of all the museums in New York, it is the only large museum that was founded by an artist rather than a collector herself. And originally, she founded what was called the Whitney Studio Club, which was really a precursor of artist spaces. It was a place where artists gathered together for conversation. It was more like a salon than it truly was a museum. And as you can see, even from some of the works that are here today, yes, she had a collection, and a number of these works were things that she collected, but it was a rather eclectic collection, because a lot of the collection was built based on her passions and based on her commitment to certain artists and actually helping to support those artists. She never had the idea of making an encyclopedic collection, and it wasn't until 1930, when the Whitney Museum was founded, that the team then started really thinking of the Whitney as a museum and not just a collection of artists. This exhibition today is founded by the history, or is inspired by the founding of the museum. There are 110 works dating from 1900 to 1965. It says here in my notes, entirely drawn for the collection. I think there's entirely except one. But I won't tell you which one, so that means you really have to look very carefully to discover which one it is. And it's quite an interesting work, I have to say. And what you see here is the sense of American art gaining a foothold. One of the reasons that Mrs. Whitney created a museum is because nobody really believed there was anything such as American art, that everybody was looking to Europe and thought all art was really had to have come from Western Europe. And in fact, the idea that there were people living and working among us who could be called and thought of as artists is what she wanted and supported. What you'll see here today is you'll see a lot of key achievements by individual figures, and a whole range of them, ranging from Elizabeth Catlett and Marsden Hartley and Jasper Johns, Joan Mitchell, Archibald Motley, Alice Neel, George O'Keeffe, Jacob Lawrence, all of whom are quite well known, and it's great, and they're iconic figures, people who have become so associated and well known at the Whitney. And what you also have is the return of Calder's Circus, which has been the signature work of the Whitney, but because of conservation, it doesn't always come out as long as it does. And you'll see it's a magnificent presentation of it. And there's a great gallery of Edward Hopper works, which you'll see on view. But we also have a number of recent acquisitions, including an extraordinary piece, one that we're very proud of. We spent a lot of time tracking down just the right work by the artist Norman Lewis. And this is a piece called American Totem, and it was a painting made in 1960 at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And Norman Lewis, who's a major figure, is a really underappreciated and underrecognized artist associated with abstract expressionism. And I think that inserting this piece, as we have many other pieces into this, actually gets people to rethink who is included, who isn't, what is the canon, what belongs in a museum, who are the people that we need to pay attention to, who we have not fully paid attention to. And we have other artists. For example, we have a new work by the artist Ed Clark. Actually, the work is not new, but it's new to us, and an artist who's also working during the period of abstract expressionism. Magnificent new work, and then a wonderful piece by the filmmaker Mary Ellen Butte, which was only on view once before. So I think you're going to discover a lot of pieces that you didn't know about. They're even pieces, and I was once the curator of the collection here, that I had no idea that we owned and that have been down in our storage for 40 years and have been rediscovered by our wonderful curator, David Breslin, who oversaw this installation. David, raise your hand over there. Congratulations, you did an extraordinary job. You know, and it's really great because here I've been at the museum 16 years and I feel like I'm seeing the collection through totally fresh eyes, and it's a wonderful way to be surprised. And I want to thank you, not just for me, obviously, but for everybody who is doing that. I want to also acknowledge Margaret Cross, who is the senior curatorial assistant who worked on this project with her, and Roxanne Smith, who's a curatorial assistant who worked on it. So I just want to congratulate the three of you on this. It's wonderful, really wonderful fresh take. I want to thank our head of exhibitions management, Maura Hefner, and Abigail Hoover, who is our registrar of all of these objects, many of which are very fragile. They're all here, and they look like they're all just been painted yesterday. That's a good sign, including our conservation department, and a particular acknowledgement to Carol Mancusi-Ongaro, who isn't with us today here, but she oversees all of our conservation research. But I'd like to acknowledge Eleanor Naj. Where's Eleanor? Otherwise known as Nora, over there. Nora is the queen of the circus, the queen of Calder. If there's anything you want to know about it, she knows more about it than anybody except Alexander Calder. And he's not here to tell us. Sandy Rower, the grandson, knows quite a bit as well, but I actually think Nora may know more. And I'll say that to Sandy himself. But it's really extraordinary. She's done an amazing installation, very fresh, and it's great to have the circus back in town. So thank you for all of your great work on it. I do want to acknowledge one particular funder who's been particularly supportive, and that is the John and Mary Shirley Foundation, who is, and it's great when you have funders who support permanent collection installations over time. I also am very pleased to announce, and this was slightly longer, something that we just heard. We had some wonderfully good news in the last week from the Henry Luce Foundation. The Henry Luce Foundation is giving a grant of $675,000 to the museum to focus on innovative displays of its permanent collection. And the Luce Foundation has been supporting the Whitney Museum for decades now, but in particular, they focused on helping to support the opening installation of the collections. I'm sure, I recognize a lot of you, and I know a lot of you were here to see America is Hard to See when we had the entire museum filled top to bottom of the collection. That would not have been possible without the Henry Luce Foundation. And Henry Luce Foundation is really geared to helping us examine what we have, to look at ourselves, to reimagine what we have, and to try to think about how can we use our collection in more interesting and more innovative ways. And I'm delighted because David Breslin, working together with our Kim Conedy, who is the Stephen and Ann Ames Curator of Prints and Drawings, will lead this project to basically review the entire collection top to bottom and think about what it is, what we have, what is the nature of our collection, what is the use of our collection, and what is the future of our collection. And we've never done a comprehensive review of this. It's interesting to note, we've now done 12 exhibitions of the collection since we've been in the museum. We now show 4 times more collection work on average than we ever have before, so that was one of the great purposes of this. And we've only been open just 4 years, and I think if you look at the range of the exhibitions that we've done over time, and great ones, I mean, from An Incomplete History of Protest, which David was very involved in, an exhibition called Human Interest, a wonderful cameo exhibition called The Face and the Moon, Drawings and Prints by Louise Nevelson. Fast forward, paintings from the 1980s, and now the Spilling Over show. These are all examples of the kinds of stories and the diversity of stories we can tell with our collection. And it's always nice to have new friends, but it's always nice to be reintroduced to your own family. So I do want to make a special thank you to the Luce Foundation for their support. We're going to be producing 2 new exhibitions with their support, and their commitment is to the Whitney telling more inclusive, more diverse, more expansive, more speculative exhibitions with our collection. And they are really at the forefront of that, and I want to make a special shout out to Michael Gilligan, who's the head of the foundation, and Terry Carbone. They don't like to be mentioned. I don't even think either of them are here this morning, but I like to mention them because they actually really got behind it. And last but not least, before introducing Scott Rothkopf, our Chief Curator, I just want to thank the entire staff of the Whitney. And, you know, it often sounds pro forma when you say that. And I'll tell you just a little anecdote this morning very quickly, that I was in a meeting with a group of staff, and one of our team who's in charge of special events and said to me, you know, we host these corporate events, and sometimes I feel guilty because we're inconveniencing people on the staff who are doing things with the program in order to have these events. And I feel like I have to apologize to them. And I said, you know, if it weren't for the work that you're doing, whether you're in special events or whether you're in a registrar or whether you're in development or whether you're whatever it is, it all contributes to make what happens in these galleries come about. And so I really mean that very, very deeply when everybody says it takes a village, it takes everybody. Everybody in this museum contributes to making these things happen. But a special shout out to Scott Rothkopf, who is our chef d'orchestra, who helps to orchestrate our whole program, and so that we can all feed those things that make it possible for the public to enjoy it. Thank you all for being here this morning.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to all of you for coming. Good morning. I will be brief, and I will do something that those of you who are frequent guests at our press preview know I always do. As long as I have you captive, ... I do want to take a moment to mention some of the other really exciting things that are happening in our program right now and in the fall. Right now, as you all know, we have the Whitney Biennial on view on the 6th floor of the museum, the 5th floor of the museum, our outdoor spaces, our lobby. What you may not know is that more than 20 of the artists who are in the Whitney Biennial are not on view at this moment. Their work is appearing in a very ambitious and exciting performance program that is in the midst of unfolding. Their work is appearing in a very thoughtful film program that we have more dates coming up for. So please, for all of you who have an interest in the biennial and in contemporary art, take a moment to look at Whitney.org. There are so many great stories still to be told throughout the course of the biennial, many great public programs that are being organized by our education department, where we will see artists on stage talking about their work and the things that matter to them. And if you have any questions, please speak to anyone in our press team. I'm looking at Stephen, Danielle, wherever you are, Lindsay, because there's a lot more to talk about with this biennial from now until the end of September. Speaking of September, I do want to let you all know what's coming up this fall. We are so excited that in our temporary exhibition program, we're about halfway into a kind of full tilt towards living artists. You've seen that in the biennial and the fall program. All of our temporary exhibitions, in fact, feature living artists. They are the incredible jazz musician, performer, composer, collaborator Jason Moran, whose survey show opens on the 8th floor in the fall and will feature collaborations with many artists that you know, including Kara Walker, Lorna Simpson, Joan Jonas. We will also have a major survey devoted to the work of Rachel Harrison filling our 5th floor starting in October. That will be joined by a presentation of a work from our collection of the very important and senior Native American artist Alan Michelson. We're very pleased to be doing more and more work with indigenous artists, some of whom also feature in the biennial, and in fact, one of whom features in this show. And we'll have Pope L, the winner of our Bucksbaum Prize from the last biennial, presenting a great new installation that was commissioned by the Whitney for our lobby gallery. And Pope L will be a kind of star this fall in New York because his work will also be on view in a show at MoMA when they reopen, and a public performance will happen that the Public Art Fund is sponsoring. And it's been a real joy and thrill to work with our colleagues at both those institutions to shine a spotlight on this artist. Last but not least, we have just added 2 shows to our calendar. One is a kind of capsule presentation, maybe the tip of the iceberg of our holdings from the Roy Lichtenstein Study Collection. Many of you have heard already that we have been in the process of working very closely with the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation to acquire several hundred of his works, including studies, sketches, photographs, finished paintings as well. And this is an incredible trove that will take, in fact, years for us to fully understand and bring to the public. But we did want to give everyone a little bit of a kind of snapshot of the kinds of materials that are in that show, and we will be presenting a group of works from his entablature series on the 3rd floor, also starting this fall, curated by David Crane. I'll give David a shout out. And we will have as well another collection display, and this brings me back to the collection, which I know is what we're here to talk about today, filling the 6th floor, curated by Elizabeth Sherman and Jenny Goldstein, called Making Knowing, Craft and Art, 1950 to 2019. And for those of you who are frequent visitors to the Whitney, you know that we've been using the 6th floor as a real laboratory to experiment with sweeping narratives from our collection, from the contemporary period of our collection, whether that was through portraits, whether that was in the program show that just closed, or the protest show that Adam mentioned. And it's really interesting and exciting to think of craft, which we can mean in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways we mean it has to do with fiber, with ceramic, with materials that sometimes have thought to be a little bit outside the realm of, quote, high art. And to see how many different artists throughout the last really 70 years have turned to those materials and brought them into their work and into this museum's collection, in fact. And I would say probably, don't quote me on this, but more than half of the work that we'll be showing has not been shown in decades at the museum. And so it's going to be a very exciting, lively look at the collection. I think something that a lot of young artists will appreciate, given the preponderance of these ways of working in contemporary practice. So we're really looking forward to that. And that's a good segue for me to just kind of highlight again what Adam said about the very dynamic approach we've been taking to the collection at the museum, whether through those big shows on the 6th floor that look at contemporary art through new lenses, whether on the 7th floor we've been focusing on more historical work, and on the 8th floor we've been doing these capsule-like shows, Spilling Over being one of those on view right now. And I have to acknowledge my colleague, David Breslin, the DeMartini family curator and director of the collection. David has been at the Whitney for fewer than 3 years. I think that is correct. He's nodding. During which time he has curated not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 of the collection displays out of the 12 that Adam mentioned. And in his spare time, curated the David Warner-Rovitch show that's now on view at the Reina Sofia Museum in Barcelona. He's had great help with some of those shows from other curators in our department, so I don't want to put it all on him. He's a wonderful collaborator. But I'm delighted to give him a moment to talk about his work, and also to tell him that he doesn't have to do a collection show for a while. But it's great to see how new generations of Whitney curators look in our storage, take the ideas that are in the air, and bring fresh eyes to the collection. And this is a kind of 50-50 version of the fresh eye test. On the one hand, we really did want to give people an introduction to the history of the museum, to some of the works that are beloved, favorite works that we haven't highlighted as frequently in our new building. We know that more than half of our visitors on any given day have never been to the Whitney before, and we hope that on this floor they can find an introduction to some of the masterworks, the favorites, but at the same time, as Adam mentioned, it's very important to us to keep changing and pushing narratives of our history, to introduce new works, as you'll see in this show, and I think David's done a remarkable job of doing that in a very beautiful installation, also with the input of Roxanne and Margaret, as Adam mentioned. I kept teasing him when I looked at the model. I said, let's keep it classy. But at the same time, I wanted it to have a kind of freshness, a way of kind of pushing boundaries in places and not feel ossified, not feel known, but in a way, and not either condescending to some of those new voices, but that they would all rise to the level of the great American artists. And that's, I think, an approach that is very important for this museum. And I think when you walk through, some of those new works not only feel right at home, but shine as strongly as any of the works that you know very well. So with that, I want to welcome David to the podium and introduce him to speak about the exhibition. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Scott. I'd like to begin just with a list of thank yous, because I didn't want those to be the things that got cut off at the end. And first to Adam and Scott for really setting the direction, kind of the energy, the excitement that we want to do these shows. The idea that there have been 12 exhibitions in this building is astonishing, but they've all been different. They've all captured a different spirit, shown parts of the collection that we would have never had an opportunity to show, bring different voices into the conversation. I really want to have a huge thank you to Melanie Taylor and to Zabi Mustafa, who is no longer at the Whitney, but who did a brilliant job designing this exhibition that really made it feel like a home for these artworks. So thanks to you. To Mara Hefner, Emily Sullivan, and Barbie Spieler, who really made the exhibition happen. Your work is felt here, so thank you. To Joshua Rosenblatt and Matt Moon, who made sure the work got on the wall, for your care and precision. Mark Stiegelman and the Carpenters, who, like any good show, make it all disappear, and their work was prodigious on this. David Selamoski, who lit the show beautifully with a great team. To Reed Farrington, to Nora, of course, for all of her work. To Margaret Cross and Roxanne Smith, who were real partners in this exhibition. So thanks to the two of you for all of your insights. Let me get into the formal remarks now, because I wanted to put this down because it is a big responsibility, and one that I know that we all take seriously, to think about the collection. And it's as humbling as it is exciting to work with it. It's evidence of the thought and labor of legions of artists, art workers, and patrons. In this exhibition alone, we are borrowing not only from the work of American artists made over 65 years, we are riffing on ideas from the collective exhibition history and collective thinking of the nearly 9 decades the museum has been in existence. And many of the curators who are in this room have done so much fantastic work, not only to bring the works into the collection, but to frame how we're thinking of them now. As Adam has remarked, all of this is anchored, though, in a founding mission and ethos that begins with Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, an artist as well as a patron, that privileged the artist, her or his vision, and the concept of a museum that was less about ideology than about experimentation. We modeled this exhibition around these core values, that there is no single right or correct way to make art, to be an artist, or even to make an exhibition. But if you start by paying homage to the artists and their works, you'll probably end up at a good place. We wanted galleries that explored themes from landscape to fantasy, but also movements like abstraction in mid-century to pop in the 1960s. And then, of course, we wanted to pay attention to the singular contributions of iconic artists like Jacob Lawrence, whose War series has a whole room devoted to it, or to Calder Circus, which is a really thoughtful, beautiful reimagination of how that work could be displayed, but really based on careful looking at how Calder performed or played the circus itself. So thank you, Nora and Roxanne, for your work on that. We feel it's foundational to present works that historically have been core to the Whitney's history, like Edward Hopper's Early Sunday Morning and Jay DeFeo's The Rose, but also to show new icons that will have or have already become fixtures in our galleries, from the Norman Lewis and Ed Clark paintings that Adam mentioned, to the Elsie Driggs Pittsburgh painting in the room right next to us, or Rosalind Drexler's Maryland Pursued by Death. that help us retell the histories of, respectively, precisionism and pop. This might seem like a truism at this point, but we're always reminding ourselves when we work with the more historical art in our collection that all of it was once contemporary. And it's our primary job not only to responsibly historicize this work, but to create scenarios where the artwork's initial contemporaneity can still be felt. And I think this is what's so distinctive about the Whitney and what this new building permits us. We're as much in the business of feeling things and feeling history as we are knowing them. And we want history to feel not only like a tide pushing back and forth or up and down to reveal our present, but we also want it to feel like a rip current that can quickly suck you to another place, other times, and allow each of us to imagine other possibilities and different futures. One concluding note, when we were trying to figure out how to handle the space farthest east, somewhat of an ancillary space next to the terrace, Scott brilliantly suggested Nick Mouse's images in mind. Mind you, this is a little bit out of our exhibition's chronology. It's from 2018. The earliest work in the show is from 1908. But it was a central work to Nick's show that was here last year, and we acquired it recently. The work is a mirror with its images painted on the reverse side. As you stand in the space, one is not only carried into Nick's own thinking about the historical figures like Cocteau or Balanchine or Lachaise, who continue to inform him, one is literally reflected by and into the artwork. And because the backdrop of the work is also the city outside, the mirror captures this cauldron of past, present, and futures being made. We, all of us, are also placed in that continuum. It's wonderful as an artwork and as an experience, but it's also a perfect metaphor for a collection and a museum that awakens the senses, enlivens the history, and gives space to joy and possibility. Thank you for coming today and for all of your interest, and Margaret, Roxanne, and I will be giving a tour shortly after this. Thank you.